Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Dick versus Manifesto. And for those of you who don't know, this is a sort of small, sort of secondary podcast I'll be running in the lead up to the general election by finding the sort of the manifestos for the little parties and of nutters, basically. And as seems only fitting, I'll be going through the manifestos piece by piece and sort of laughing at them, and maybe even agreeing with them. You know, they're not always wrong on everything. But to start with, the first episode I did, I figured I might as well, seeing as how I've been focusing on him for last week, Mike Buchanan, who launched his 2015 manifesto. Justice for Men and Boys, brackets, and the Women Who Love Them Party. I want to just go through one thing. I'll be carrying on with this. And now, the last time, I only got through one of his 20 points. Now, I don't want to do 20 episodes of Mike fucking Buchanan's thing. And I've only got until May, until the general election. So, I probably might want to speed it up a bit. But I do want to say one thing. One thing I never mentioned, and I want to read this bit. This is an introduction to the manifesto on the website. I just want to read. We are pleased to present our general election manifesto. We being the sort of problem there, because I don't know who he's talking about, him and his imaginary friend. The document covers 20 areas where the human rights of men and boys, brackets, including the unborn, and sometimes girls, brackets, including the unborn, are assaulted by the state's actions and inactions. Now, keep in mind one thing. First of all, he said, and sometimes girls. Keep in mind, he opened the manifesto. The first thing he said in the manifesto, which I covered last time, was he said, there are no areas where females are discriminated against by the state. None. And yet in the introduction, he contradicts himself by pointing out that sometimes girls are discriminated against, sometimes, including the unborn. And that's an important point to remember here, because a lot of people I know who may very well support this guy are also atheists. And I want you to know, this guy is a proper right-wing Christian pro-lifer. So his view of this comes from a totally pro-life position. Now, I'm going to try and get through a few more than just one in this episode. This is obviously a podcast. This is a subset of the left-wing propaganda podcast. Please, you can download this on the website on Spreaker. It will be available on iTunes. And if you'd like to support my work, please subscribe to the podcast via iTunes or Stitcher Radio, or you can go through Spreaker, or simply subscribe to the YouTube. These podcasts will be uploaded in full on my secondary YouTube channel, which is currently under the name of Dr. Mike Filbert Mason Buchanan. But that's purely for the purposes of the website, for the Justice. And please don't forget to visit justiceformenandboys.com and have a look around there. Now, in the next part of it, the second part he covers the area is fetal alcohol syndrome. This is apparently an area where men are discriminated against. Now, the background. He starts off by citing the Wikipedia entry for fetal alcohol syndrome. Now, for those of you who don't know, fetal alcohol syndrome is basically a condition where a woman gets pregnant, the mother's an alcoholic, or she at least consumes a lot of alcohol during the pregnancy, and it affects the child in later life. Now, it would have been nice, Mike, if you'd have cited the actual, instead of citing Wikipedia, you could have cited an actual medical journal. That would have been nice. But the problem is, we go through the basic problem we have here. He says, in our view, drinking alcohol during pregnancy at a level that might lead to fetal alcohol syndrome amounts to inflicting grievous bodily harm on an unborn child. The Crown Prosecution Service issues guidelines sentencing people convicted of a very serious crime against the person. Now, he proposes that the government should introduce legislation to prosecute women who have given birth to babies with fetal alcohol syndrome with inflicting GBH, and if found guilty, give them custodial sentences in line with CPS guidelines. The problem with this, however, Mike, is this would involve you changing the entire law so that fetuses are now classified as people. Because, of course, fetuses are not classified as people. They're not classified as... They don't have human rights. And that would involve a whole new set of subjects, which would ultimately probably lead... which would tie in with his abortion problems, which he wants... which we all know, which, as I covered in the last one, are quite sort of restrictive in themselves. Now, so that's the fecal outer hole syndrome. So we got that one out of the way. Genital mutilation is the next one. Now, with genital mutilation, this is quite interesting. Because in many ways, I actually agree with a lot of what Mike's saying. I feel that he's got the right idea, but he's got it for the wrong reasons. And he says the law in the UK forbids all forms of female genital mutilation, FGM, including those who have less impact on females, which have less impact on females than male genital mutilation has on males. Female genital mutilation is justifiably regarded as a human rights issue, and the law makes no accommodation for religious and cultural considerations. This is true. However, he goes on to say about how it doesn't affect males. Now, in principle here, I agree with him. He calls for the practice of male genital mutilation on individuals under the age of 18 to be made illegal, other than on medical grounds, and all NGM operations should be registered. The reason for them being to perform recorded and related information passed on to Department of Health, blah, blah, blah. Now, I actually would agree with him here. However, he considers this an issue of sexual discrimination, and this is not, in my opinion. Now, you might very well disagree with me on this, and this is fine. It's definitely an area where a lot of debate comes into practice. But, of course, it doesn't help, Mike, again... When you're citing for sources, you're citing avoiceformen.com. That's not a reliable enough source. However, that aside, we'll go on to... now, the problem with this is, simply, first of all, in principle, I agree. And with him, that they should be treated as equal. The problem, however, is not that this isn't a gender issue. This is a cultural and religious issue. For example, I mean, in America, the vast majority of American men are actually circumcised, and it's interesting that we don't, because there's always this question about female genital mutilation is an Islamic practice. And, of course, it's always pointed out that whilst it takes place in countries that are predominantly Islamic, it also takes part in predominantly Christian nations as well. It's actually an African practice. But we don't... A majority of Christian in America, the majority of people are Christian, but the majority of men are circumcised. Now, we don't sit there and accuse Christianity of being... of practicing female genital mutilation, of practicing male genital mutilation. And the fact is that male genital mutilation is not as damaging on the whole. And I won't say that it's not damaging at all. I'm not defending it, I'm just pointing out a fact there. The process of female genital mutilation is quite... And women having their clitorises forcibly removed to stop them having any sexual urges so they don't cheat on their men... is disgusting, is just appalling as justification for it. But the problem with it is that in this country, in Britain, we don't have a history of men who are not Jewish getting circumcised. It just doesn't happen. But we also don't have a practice of. We have a practice of Jews, but they've been doing this for a very long time. So culturally, in Britain, we're kind of it's kind of something we don't deal with, or you don't deal with, unless you're part of a Jewish community. And there's never been much of an uproar for it. Now, in cases of in America, because the majority of men are circumcised, and they've got the same problem, but for the opposite reason. And whereas the practice of female genital mutilation, female circumcision, this is something that has only come about in recent years with an influx of Islamic immigration. So the idea that people are sat there going, oh no, we don't want people to cut off, do female genital mutilation, but boys, fuck them, let them chop their as if men have got this vested interest in having other men's foreskins removed, and that it's some kind of discrimination against men. That's just consequential. That's just a consequence. It happens to be men. If it was the other way round, now I don't. This is where the problem is. I can't say for sure, but to me it strikes that if it was the other way round, if the situation was reversed somehow, so it would be like the female genital mutilation had always been part of the culture for as long as it has, and it was now Jews who were coming over. The situation could be reversed. So I agree with Mike, but for completely different reasons on this one. So I'll give him that one. That men may choose voluntarily to have male genital mutilation performed on themselves any time after their 18th birthday. We've all seen Jackass. It's the way it works there. But yes, so we'll find it. Anyway, we're on that. Now this is the one I wanted to get to. Because it really... Now, I've had this thing for a while, is whenever you're dealing with people like Mike, Mike is a throwback. Mike is a throwback to an era long gone. And the thing about people like Mike, and you'll notice this whenever I've responded to people on YouTube who have similar kind of old-fashioned approaches to stuff, is that the problem with him is that they like to look back to a different era. And they'll go to a different point in history, and they'll say, "Oh, things were much better back then in this era." I recently did a video response to a guy on YouTube called Martin J. Willett, who, for no reason, was saying 100 years ago you could do this, you could discriminate against people, and it was fine. No one complained. If you read Anders Breivik's manifesto. And I'm not saying Mike Buchanan is Anders Breivik. This is the first example that points to mind. You'll notice that if you read his manifesto, it starts by him lauding the 50s and how great the 50s were. Oh, in the 1950s it was brilliant. Men were men and women were women, and and everyone knew their place and everything was fine. And of course, the whole problem with this whole philosophy of looking back to a point in the past and saying, "Oh, we should go back to then," is you have to ask the question: well, if it was so fucking brilliant, why did we change? If everyone loved it and everything was perfect and everything was fine, why did things change? And of course, there's no real answer to this. Now, you can always see how fucking bad. You can always tell how bad the position is of the person who's having to reference a point in history as being the perfect point in history by how far back they have to go. Now, I'm going to read the first part. Now, the next part of Mike's manifesto is fatherlessness, restoring strong families. Now, to me, that sounds a lot more sinister than it probably is intended to. Now, for centuries, probably millennia, the family has been the basic building block of society. Okay, I'm just highly debatable, but we'll go with it. Traditionally, a man would marry and set up a new family unit. Nobody says a man would marry. It would be the man who went out and the man would marry and set up, the man did everything, right? With him as the protector of his wife and their children, and take sole responsibility, both morally and legally, for their welfare. This is traditional, apparently, according to Mike. And this is good. The family was stable because it was for life. Now, this is the point I want to... This is the reference to the past, right? As Sir James Wilde, better known to posterity as Lord Penzance, put it in 1866... Marriage, as understood in Christendom, may be defined as the voluntary union for life as one man and one woman to the exclusion of all others.